Human talent is arguably the most important national resource we can think of, particularly this day and age of ever-globalizing knowledge economy. Then what is Korea doing, to not just develop, but also retain and even invite more of top-notch global talents? And that's what's coming up in today's program, Upfront.
The low birth rate has become one of the most significant challenges facing the international community. Reduction of the working population is expected to become a serious issue, along with the low fertility rate and aging phenomenon. Advanced countries around the world have engaged in fierce competition to attract talented manpower to better deal with such challenges. Countries like the U.S. and Canada have taken active measures, including granting nationality and building a better environment for global talent. First of all, in case of the U.S., there is Silicon Valley in California, a home to many of the world's largest high-tech corporations, as well as global talent. About 32% of startups in Silicon Valley have been founded by Indians. Indians who have started to move to the U.S. since the 1970s have now become one of the major driving forces of Silicon Valley. Aside from India, global manpower from a variety of countries like the UK, China, and Japan have been working at Silicon Valley. The U.S. has actively promoted the immigration policy, considering the fact that talented manpower from overseas has been a contributing factor to the economic growth of the country. By revising the Immigration Act in 1990, the U.S. introduced the preference system for employment-based immigrants. The system has contributed to attracting overseas manpower, who could be in the country's best interest and controlling the untrained human resource. Also, in 2014, U.S. President Obama announced Immigration Executive Order, which included visa reforms for high-skilled immigrants and foreign students studying in the science and technology fields. Biopolis in Singapore is another example of attracting a lot of talented manpower from around the world. After the distribution, finance, and tourism industries, which were major industries of Singapore, faced crisis, it has chosen biotechnology industry as the country's new growth engine. The Singaporean government established 340,000 square meters of Biopolis, a biomedical research and development center. By providing unlimited financial support and offering top-notch research facilities, it has successfully attracted talented manpower from all around the world. As a result, about 20,000 jobs have been created in the field of biotechnology, and the industry has become one of Singapore's rising growth engines. Upfront discusses necessary measures for Korea amid the growing competition among advanced countries to attract global talent.
Well, for today's discussion, we have Shin Gi-wook, Professor of Sociology, and also the Director of Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center at the Stanford University. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And also Professor Rennie. She is a Yonsei University professor at its Underwood International College. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm quite excited about today's topic because this is something that matters for all of us, indeed. And let's start with the obvious question because we have lots of viewers who are joining from all around the world here, and we need to cover some of the basics. The first question we want to talk about is, of course, a lot of countries are trying their very best to develop and retain their own human resource, right? Top talents. But these days, increasingly, we are thinking or talking about attracting more of the global talents. Why do we need to do that? It seems obvious, but I think we need some background explanation.
I think in my view, the answer is quite simple because right now Korea does not produce enough manpower for their economy. When I was growing up in Korea in 1960s and 1970s, one main policy objective of the Korean government was to control population.
Right.
Because at the time, there are simply too many people.
Right.
So they really had to contain population growth.
We have two-child policy with
Right.
2 children. Right.
But right now, the situation has changed almost opposite way. So now, Koreans don't really have enough babies, and population is aging.
Right.
So Korea doesn't have enough working age population, right? So therefore, they are facing big challenge in the coming years. And then one way of dealing with this demographic change or challenge is to produce more babies.
Right.
And as far as I know, the Korean government has spent a lot of money in encouraging people to have more babies.
Right.
Do you know how much?
Well, what's the money
It's
amount?
about 60 billion over the last 10 years.
Last 10 years,
Yeah.
60 billion.
And no
what's the result we're getting?
The outcome is the same. People still don't have more babies.
Well, I think that's a topic that we need to continue to talk about throughout the program here.
Right.
But let's start with some of the basic points. About immigration, there is a lot needs to be done in terms of discussion here. But let's start with the first point of immigration that we have been seeing already for years, which is the inflow of blue-collar workers from developing countries. What's the current status here, and then what's the current the issue that we are facing here? Are we still continuing to see the inflow, or are we seeing kind of slowing down? What kind of issues and problems we have? Let's start with the working level.
So let me make one point, and maybe Professor Moon can add. But for last maybe 20, 30 years, Korea has been importing a lot of unskilled labor from China and Southeast Asia. But now it's time for Korea to shift their focus from unskilled to skilled labor.
But
Because,
we still have a serious shortage of unskilled labor, right? When we talk about SMEs these days, SMEs do have serious trouble finding workers who are willing to work for them. And one of the key reasons why they're relocating outside is because of the shortage of the labor.
Right, but still, I think Korea has now more than like 200,000, workers, right, from those developing countries. But now Korea is really facing big challenge of importing skilled labor. And Korea is not only country that has to import skilled workers from foreign countries.
Right.
Okay, many other advanced countries,
Many European
in
countries.
Europe and Japan, are having the same problem. And then this is becoming more and more important issue.
Right, indeed. And then in terms of like securing these foreign laborers in order to deal with, or not laborers, but workers and the producers who will be willing to work in the production. You have mentioned the results has not been very good, but can we elaborate on that just a little bit about Korea's efforts in terms of compensating or supplying more of the workers through the immigrant workers?
Okay, so some of the context that's missing from what we've been discussing is so there is a demographic crisis.
Right.
Everybody recognizes that, and many advanced countries have the same problem. But at the same time, it's a very timely problem because people are becoming much more mobile. So there's an increase in the mobility of talent.
Right.
So in a sense, there are more opportunities to grab those people and to attract those talent.
What
and
makes
keep them
people
to-
more mobile than before?
Well, people travel more. There's the transportation kind of revolution. People don't feel the need to be rooted in one place in order to work, especially in a knowledge economy. So you don't have to be in a particular location to be productive for a particular company. You can be anywhere.
So basically what we're talking about is for years, perhaps we've been importing blue-collar workers who will be willing to work in lower skill level jobs, but now we are switching our focus basically, right?
Right, so we have to shift.
Okay, and there can we expect these, the foreign workers who will be coming in different kinds, right, different categories, will they become the brains of the economy and then also consumers of the economy who can get the economy going? Is that the picture we're looking at here?
Right. So let me say about like 3 layers of economy. Okay. So one is what we call 3D industry.
Okay.
Okay. So
Explain that to our viewers here.
so 3D means like
Dirty,
dangerous,
and difficult.
Difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So many Koreans do not want to work in those industry.
Right.
I mean, that's why Korea has been importing unskilled labor from China and Southeast Asia. So in my view, that area has been, fairly well covered, if not sufficiently. On the other extreme, big jabbers like Samsung Electronics, okay, they are really global companies,
Right.
and they have to compete not only within Korea, but have to compete with like Google, Apple, and other global companies.
Sure.
And obviously, many Koreans are willing to and want to work in those big global companies.
Right.
But
So we have enough competition among Koreans.
right, but the trouble is that whether using Korean labor alone enough to compete with other global companies.
In what sense
the world.
enough? The competitiveness?
Yeah, because
knowledge we
if you look at like Google or Apple, right? Okay, they hire their manpower from all over the world, not only American. I mean, Google and Apple are in the Silicon Valley,
Right.
but it's not really American company because they hire not only American but Chinese, Indian engineers, and so on. So if you think about Samsung Electronics competing with Apple or Google, I mean, is it enough to only rely on Korean manpower, or they have to look for more globally?
I see.
Okay, so that's one challenge. And then there are many companies in between, right? Between 3D industry and Jabber.
Right.
And what we hear is that many of those companies also feeling shortage
Right.
of skilled labor, technicians and professionals. So that's one area Korea really has to focus on.
In terms of kinds of business, what are the kinds of businesses or category of businesses we are talking about? Korean media have been talking a lot about we need more global brain for IT industry. IT industry, I'm sure, is not the only one, right? Or what are some of the areas?
So service sectors.
Service such as
So
what?
sectors like internet development or all of the IT sectors, sectors that involve kind of services,
Does it include
industries that
finance?
need to be localized.
What do you mean by localizing?
They need to be catered to local populations and local cultures.
You're meaning
Yeah.
local, meaning the localities overseas
Yes.
in terms of marketing?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have some examples about these global talents helping those kind of global marketing here? What are some of the specific examples we can think of? I was thinking about Hyundai Motor for one.
Yeah, Hyundai Motor is one, but also I keep referring to Samsung. But as far as you know, they Korea is very short with software engineers.
Right, right.
So I think for Samsung, I think more than half of their software engineers are foreigners.
I see. In Korea these days?
Yeah, in Korea.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So either they bring Indian engineers into Korea, or they hire them in India.
I heard about stories about Hyundai Motor, for instance, securing global talents for their design functions and so on. And I understand their story has been a little bit mixed. There have been some success, there has been some disappointments and all that. So basically what we are looking at is how prevalent, professors, is Korea's corporate efforts to seek out global talent at this particular point. Our viewers may wonder how actively Korean companies and businesses are actually trying this. What's the best way to pick the picture we can paint?
Well, as far as I know, they are fairly well aware of this problem or this challenge.
Right.
And I think many Korean big companies have a section on what they call global talent. Okay, and then Yeah, I know for a fact that I live in Silicon Valley, and Korean companies are looking for global talent in the area to bring to Korea.
I see.
Sometimes they spend a lot of time because you have to persuade why they can or should come to Korea, because it's not easy, right? So I think they're making a lot of effort. But at the same time, it's a different issue how well they really adapt to Korean working environment.
Right. About that point, let's touch upon it later on, because it's a very important point in terms of implementing this new idea, right? Making it into action here. But before then, in terms of the global talents that we can seek from overseas, are we expecting production capability and also later on consumers who can buy and become the part of the economy as well, right? While they're contributing to the business efforts to reach out overseas. What else are we expecting? I think some of the people have talked about for the past at least 20 years that I remember, this foreign talents becoming the overall moving force behind Korea's reform, changing of the culture. Are we still looking at that, and have we seen certain success in doing that, introducing new change into this, kind of bringing new blood, making the society anew? What's the achievement? What's lacking here?
Well, we think that foreigners can contribute in a number of different ways. First, they bring their skills, right? They bring their education, they bring their working experience. So in that sense, they bring their human capital to the economy. And that's the traditional way of thinking about foreigners and what they can do for the economy. But another aspect that people don't really think about is that foreigners bring their social capital as well. They bring their ties, they bring their networks with their home countries and whatever other countries they've been to. So they bring those networks and ties, and in the knowledge economy, those ties are what are needed to be effective, right? It doesn't just take human capital. In a sense, social capital can be even more important. So when they come to Korea, they can bring those ties, and Korea can capitalize on those ties as well.
It looks like it's a point that really seems to relate to marketing, selling more goods overseas. When you're talking about, they're not physically bringing their network here, but they're bringing the connections that reaches out overseas, right here. What about corporate culture? What about social change here? Are we expecting something still, or after about 20 years efforts, are we giving up on that side, corporate reform or
I think it's a little too early to tell, but a lot of things are changing. For example, we visited a major Korean corporation, and there were many kind of Muslim skilled labor there, and we noticed that the cafeteria actually prepared vegetarian kind of dishes just for these foreign skilled labor. And we thought that was kind of impressive for a country like Korea.
Right, so in a way bringing diversity to the society and culture. That's a great point. I'm still seeking this, like a lot of people seem to still believe that Korea's chaebol needs to change in terms of globalizing its views and culture and all that. Are we seeing any impact on that one after like 20 years long efforts in this? Are they being promoted to higher positions?
Right, I think that's a problem. So let me give a few examples. As you know, some years ago, KAIST appointed.
It's a university in Korea that focuses on
science
technology
and technology.
Right.
And then actually they appointed as their president, actually, a Stanford professor. So he won Nobel Prize.
I remember him.
And he's white Caucasian. But he had to leave after I think only like 2 years.
Right.
So basically it failed. And
that was quite a while ago, 10, 15 years ago.
No, it's only maybe like about 10 years or less than 10 years ago. Okay, then they hired a Korean American professor from MIT.
Right.
I would say maybe half successful, maybe more successful than
depending on whom you ask. Right. Very polarizing views.
But at least he lasted longer than his previous one. So obviously they tried, but I think the outcome has been quite mixed.
I see. Okay.
And going back to like Samsung here, I think all top executives are still all Korean.
for instance, the overall Korean society's resistance towards outsiders in general. And you talked about the minister nominee Kim Jong-un's case, who never got his position here. But recently, we may remember the head of the ruling party talking about the need for actively inviting Korean Chinese as the new workforce. And he was bombarded by criticism. So some of the skeptics and critics have noted that that kind of criticism reflects Korea's lack of readiness to invite in global talents. What, as sociologists, how to explain that lingering remnants of the resistance against outsider in this country? How do you explain that? Why do we have that?
Okay, I think there are historical and social, issues. Historically, at least for last 100 years or so, Korea has been promoting this notion of ethnic homogeneity. So we are taught in schools that Koreans are very proud of being homogeneous, right? And then we preach it, the purity of the Korean blood, right? So therefore, the many Koreans are not comfortable in living with or working with non-ethnic Koreans.
Now, you have an explanation that is education results in this kind of exclusivist, in a way, tendency here. How do you explain that education? Why did we need that education then, at that time?
Well, at the time, obviously, we are fighting Japanese colonialism. And going back to early 20th century, Japan was trying to assimilate Koreans into Japanese. In reaction, Koreans were saying no, we are different people, we are a different nation. So it makes a lot of sense to promote ethnic homogeneity at the time.
Right.
And also during industrial age, there's some value to produce more homogeneous, working population.
Why?
Because during industrialization, standardization is very important.
And mobilization? People who are willing to sacrifice themselves?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's what happened in 1960s and 70s in
Building
Korea.
community spirit.
Yeah, because Koreans were taught to make contribution to their nation.
Right.
Okay, so if you say I'm making profit for my own interest, then it was considered very selfish. So you're supposed to make contribution, for your nation, your community, right?
Right. So makes perfect sense here, and I think we have good explanation about Korea's tendency here. But now question remains, and the important question here is we need to improve it now.
Right.
We have to change it. What are some of the ways we can work on it and improve it? Any ideas, Professor Moon?
I think an obvious solution is education reform. I've done some research on higher education curriculum in Korean universities, and there's very surprisingly little mention of diversity within Korea, minorities in Korea. Very interestingly, whenever diversity is dealt with in the curriculum, it's all about other countries. Diversity in Latin America or diversity elsewhere. It's not something that's embraced within Korean society. So you can see that in the curriculum, what Professor Shin just said. It's reflected in the curriculum. It's reflected in the higher education curriculum, and that's something that I think really needs to change.
But these days, we've been hearing a lot about multicultural families.
Yeah.
Is such effort being reflected in school curriculum yet? Is that what you're saying? I mean, in the media, we hear about multicultural families all the time, basically.
Right.
But how far has the effort come in terms of actually reaching out and to the minds and hearts and minds of the youngsters and as well as ordinary citizens? Is it all the words so far?
Right. Okay. So first of all, multiculturalism in Korea is almost a derogatory term because...
Still?
Yes, still. Because it mostly refers to underdeveloped countries. It refers to foreign brides, right? It refers to vulnerable groups in society whom we need to assist or help. So it's not really a concept that embraces diversity and says, oh, everybody can benefit from this diversity, right? It's still a concept of welfare or assistance.
Are you saying still we need efforts to redefine the term multiculturalism?
Right.
Absolutely. And
Not only just repeating the word again and again in the media, but we need to think about what it actually means.
yeah, or even coming up with another concept.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they are saying it's a multiculturalism, but I think in its essence, it's basically assimilationist policy. Because
Sort of like old French style?
yeah, well, I mean, if you look at their program, then they're teaching, how to speak Korean,
Or
Right.
how to make kimchi.
kimchis, right? But not really trying to understand their culture,
Right.
their tradition, right?
Right.
Because I was quite surprised to hear that there are about 100,000 Muslims in Korea. How many Koreans understand Muslim culture?
I see.
Very little, right? So when you talk to some corporation, they are saying that, yeah, sure, we also promote cultural diversity. But in my view, it's only in rhetoric, but not in practice.
I see.
But if we compare Korea to, let's say, United States
Right.
or Silicon Valley, that is quite popular these days in Korea. And I'm telling people that Silicon Valley is not built by white Caucasian Americans.
Of course.
So
not.
without immigrants like Indian
Indians,
and Chinese engineers,
Right.
there's no way to build Silicon Valley.
Absolutely. Right.
In the United States, we really value cultural diversity,
Right.
because there's a firm belief that diversity is essential for innovation. So in Korea, they wanted to promote innovation,
Right.
but they're not willing to embrace
Okay.
cultural diversity.
A
They
lot-
don't really recognize the
Right.
value of being different.
A lot of work needs to be done on that sense in terms of our thinking and all that. But since you've been talking about United States, let's talk about United States case here. I'm thinking about Donald Trump, who wants to build a wall on this borderline between the United States and Mexico, meaning reflecting the sentiments of the blue-collar workers, especially whites, I suppose. I
Right,
don't
yeah.
have to refer the races here, but so going beyond the culture, just talking about democracy or the pluralistic system here, I'm really worried about the reaction from the Korea's blue-collar workers against foreign workers coming in, and even white-collar workers who may be taking their jobs. I think this goes beyond the Korean culture. This seems to be something about human nature, as we are being reminded by what's happening in the United States. That kind of concern in Korea, how does it exist? Do we see any possibility of it? Is it nonsense to think about it at this point? What's your take on this?
That's a real barrier because there's a popular perception that when foreigners come to Korea, they take away Korean jobs. So in the case of the United States, I mean, they have lots of problems, but as Professor Shin noted, they really institutionalize diversity in corporations and in higher education in the form of diversity management. You're a businessman, so I'm sure you've heard of this. And in the United States, they offer workers an H-1B visa, which is a visa that you need if a foreigner wants to work in the United States.
Right.
And there are studies that show that the more H-1B visas that are granted, an additional 100 jobs are created. So it's associated with job creation.
Cascading effect.
Right. And also an increase in domestic wages as well. So those kinds of
Immigrant workers actually contribute to increasing domestic wage?
wages and job creation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I have training in economics, and I need to look into details about the mechanism through which the greater supply of workers actually contribute to raising of wages here. But that's a very interesting point. But okay, then.
Okay, so I think this is a very important issue because it's a political issue.
It's a political issue.
Because as you know, a lot of people saying our young people don't have jobs.
Right.
Right? That's a popular sentiment. So if you argue that we should bring foreign skilled labor to Korea,
Especially the higher quality human
right, exactly. Then
resource. They're
they'll
competing
say-
against the Korean youngsters.
Right, then they immediately assume that those foreigners will take away jobs from our own
Right.
children, right?
Right.
I mean, that's why it can be politically dangerous for politicians. But then, we have to really correct such a misperception because global talent can really create jobs. I mean, that's what happened in the United States, as Rennie mentioned. But there's still popular perception is that, Koreans are competing with the foreigners over the same job. So therefore, if we bring foreigners to Korea, then our own people, our own kids may not have jobs. They may lose jobs to them. And I think it's a very misleading perception that we have to correct.
Then I think one of the practical ways to do so, to contribute making that change to happen, is sharing that kind of studies. Have some of your economics colleagues to publicize more of those kind of studies, because that's something new, some new point that needs to be widely shared in this country for sure. Going back to the overall cultural barriers here in this country, as a specialist, sociologist watching the social phenomena of these people, when they come into Korea, the barriers that they run into and so on, what are the generalizable in a way observation points here, and how do we overcome? You have mentioned we need more of education, but can we get further into that point here? I think in terms of flow, I think that
Could we talk about immigration policy?
Please.
Or even working conditions for foreigners in corporations, in Korean corporations?
Okay.
Okay. So
in terms of cultures.
culture.
Right. Cultural adaptation. Well, what's happening here?
I'm not sure what you mean exactly by culture in corporations, but let me share with you.
For example, in colleges, universities, I'm sure in your college,
Right.
International College at Yonsei University, you do have international faculty members.
We do.
Do they participate in key department personnel decisions? Do they come in to join the room to make key critical decision-making process for the school? Is it happening? Because I'm asking that question because arguably schools, universities are some of the leading organizations in Korea that have actively invited foreign talents. So what kind of cultural barriers do you see in your school? Without offending your colleagues at Yonsei University.
Or myself.
Right.
Yes, I mean, I can't deny that there are cultural barriers. I think sometimes foreigners, they don't really make the effort to learn Korean and to fit in.
You're going to get into trouble with your foreign
But at
colleagues
the
when you
same
go back
time,
home.
at the same time, I really feel that Korean universities can really use foreigners much more productively and effectively, because there are many people who'd like to contribute to the Korean academic community, but they're not really given a chance or the position or the decision-making kind of authority to do that.
I know
Absolutely
some
right.
of the Korean universities that has regularized a faculty lunch program where all the faculty members, regardless of the nationality, come in and speak in English and have lunch together.
Okay.
I wonder whether your school has that program. You don't have to say yes or no here,
Okay.
but those kind of little things I think could help in some ways considerably.
Right, but I think my understanding is that sure, Korean universities have been hiring more foreign professors over the last maybe 10 years, which is a very positive sign, and they should continue. But at the same time, they don't really or fully utilize talents of those foreign faculty. I mean, typically, they were expected to teach courses in English, maybe publish articles in English, but they're not really part of their community.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of my perception.
Language, would you say, is one of the barriers? Professors, when they get together, Korean professors do feel uncomfortable in a way discussing school matters in English,
I mean,
and that could act as a barrier
that
against
could
the
be part of
foreign faculty.
reason, but also I think culture and also institution. So, as you know, Korean universities are trying to become like global
Right.
or world-class universities. But their approach is very instrumentalist. Okay, and they very care about global rankings,
Right.
and they are trying to play the game, but they don't really promote culture that is really essential
Right.
to become global university. Okay, let me give you one specific example.
Please.
I grew up in Korea. As you know, I have this strong accent, so I'm not a native speaker. I went to US for graduate studies, and I'm now a tenured professor at Stanford. And I've been running a major research center at Stanford for the last 10 years. And I often, ask this question to my, Korean colleague. Are you ready to give your foreigner, especially somebody from, let's say, developing country,
Right.
a major position at your university,
Right.
Seoul National, Yonsei, or Korea? If you're not ready, then forget about becoming global university.
Exactly.
Because as far as I know, I don't really know anyone at top Korean universities who gave top position
Right.
to foreigners.
And that particular school you mentioned earlier, part of our discussion, their case has not helped in that sense, like furthering that kind of cause. So
Right.
indeed, I think academia is one area we should really set the examples here. But for the interest of time, we have to move on
Sure.
in terms of what we have to talk about. We cannot dwell on this point forever, even though I want to here. Let's talk about Korea's efforts overall inviting more of the global talents. But here we have a video clip that's available in terms of what Korea is doing to invite and speed up overall efforts to bring in this kind of global talent. And we'll continue on right after this.
Korea has focused on education and fostering talented manpower from old times. The Korean government has galvanized a lot of efforts on fostering professionals as well as attracting global talent amid rapid advancement of science and technology within the international community. However, according to the statistics announced by Ministry of Justice on November last year, about 629,000 foreign laborers have been staying in Korea with employment visas. 580,000 among them are low-skilled workers, and only 8% of them are known to be professional manpower. The number of talented workers from overseas is far from enough, especially in the fields of IT, science, and finance, which are the main driving forces of the nation's growth. So the Korean government has taken a variety of different strategies to induce more talent from all around the world. First of all, the government established Contact Korea within KOTRA, Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, to help them find and attract the world's most talented professionals. Contact Korea seeks talented manpower from all around the world for domestic corporations and institutions, and gives full support, including visa recommendations and helping with relocation to Korea. Also, the government has been thinking about easing the visa rules to better attract foreign talent. Discussions have been made to reform the current visa system for high-scoring foreign students so that they can study, work, and grant the right of permanent residence more easily. The core of the reform is that government-invited foreign scholarship students can change their status of stay from a student visa to a work visa when they get a job right after finishing their studies in Korea. Also, the government is thinking about changing the immigration system and easing the residency requirement to better attract global talent. Under the current system, foreigners can gain permanent residence status in Korea if they earned high enough scores in age, education, and income. However, in case of highly educated and professional manpower from overseas, they can get the right of permanent residence when they meet the residency requirement for 1 year. The government has emphasized the significance of attracting global talent and implemented various measures to better induce talented manpower from overseas. And all eyes are now on the expected changes the global talent will bring to the Korean economy in the future.
Well, we've been talking about bringing in global talents here into this country, but also there's a point of concern that is looking at Korean talents moving away, moving out of this country as well. For instance, IMD, leading the business education organization in Europe, recently they published a study, not necessarily recently, but latest one that they published was 2015. And in their report, they were saying the brain drain in Korea is, they conducted a survey of
Right.
61 countries, and Korea is 42 in terms of its failure to manage its brain drain. So if you're, the worst case, you will be 61, but Korea is 42 out of 61, lower side of the scale. What's happening here? How serious is the overall picture? What are we looking at?
So I think that speaks to several trends in Korean society. One is a very strong 조기 유학 trend. So more and more Korean students are leaving Korea at an earlier age, not just for college, and staying abroad.
Like middle school, high school
Exactly,
age?
exactly.
Right. Even elementary school.
Even elementary school. In addition to that,
But how does that contribute to the brain drain? Explain to our viewers.
well, if those students decide not to come back to Korea,
Why would they
or-
decide not to?
because they're acculturated in their home countries, and when they do that, they decide to stay because they're comfortable.
We do indeed have, I've seen many of such students who came back after their education and running into all this cultural background, cultural conflict, difficulties, and deciding to go back if they can. Sometimes, often because of visa requirements and so on, they're not even given chance to leave Korea, but they're building up their frustration against the Korean culture, which they have brought up kind of unfamiliarized in a way. So I guess that's
Yeah,
what
that's
you're
part
talking
of
about.
it. That's part of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And also at the higher education level, students study abroad. They attend universities abroad. In the United States, Korean students are the third largest group of foreign students after China and India, and that's pretty big considering the size of Korea.
Right. Right.
But per capita, Koreans are the largest number of foreign students in the United States.
Professor Shin, you're heading on the think tank or research center that covers Asia Pacific issues. According to IMD report, they're saying Korean situation of brain drain is more serious than Japan and China. Does it make sense to you? What's been happening in Japan, for instance? Have they all kept their brains within the boundary of their country because they are so exclusionist? I'm not trying to be anti-Japanese here, but how does it compare?
So I talked to many leaders in Japan. Their main concern is that not many Japanese young people go out to study abroad.
Oh, okay.
So that's a problem. So if you
that
look
relates to Professor Moon's explanation.
if you look at
right?
statistics, the number of Japanese going to study abroad has declined over the years.
So they don't lose them.
But
They just skip them.
at the same time, they're concerned, right, about not becoming global leaders, right?
Right. But China's case, we know of a lot of names that go back to their country looking for very exciting opportunities, right?
China is very good at that because they have a huge diaspora. So they're very good at drawing back their citizens and providing
Explain that
incentives.
to me. But if they have a good size of population overseas, how does it work to? How does it serve the purpose of bringing that back home? I don't understand. What do you mean?
Well, there's two possibilities. They could stay abroad and contribute to their home country by acting as a bridge between the
see.
two countries,
I
or
see.
they could come back and act as human capital and social capital, bring their social networks. And China provides monetary and employment incentives for people to come back, and that actually draws talent back home.
That reminds me of something interesting, Professor Shin. I think in your studies you're talking about, I forget the terminology for it, but the students who are staying after their study overseas and still contribute to their home country. Is it a linkage, a bridge? What's the term?
Right. So before that, let me back off one step, and then let me give you one very specific example. Okay, very simple math. Okay, at Stanford, we have many international students.
Right.
I mean, not only from Korea, China,
Of course.
India, but all over the world. Okay, many of them wanted to stay after graduation.
In the United States?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially in the Silicon Valley. I mean, on the other hand, we have also quite a good number of international students coming to Korea.
Okay.
Most of them leave after their education. So now, you can ask, why? And then which country will be better off in the long run, right? Because, U.S. is able to attract and retain international brain, whereas Korea continues to lose.
That's true.
So then what's the future of, two countries? I mean, that's one thing that we should think about.
Right.
And as to your question about brain drain to brain linkage, I mean, I oftentimes use my own example, okay? Because I was born and grew up in Korea, and I went to Yonsei, and then left in 1983. And then I never returned. So am I a case of brain drain for Korea?
Or brain linkage.
Assuming I have some brain power.
Okay.
Well, what's your answer?
That's a difficult one to say on air. So I thought you were asking about your brain power.
No, whether I'm case of brain drain for Korea.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because all these kind of surveys, when they say brain drain, does it include brain linkage? From there, do we have to subtract brain from brain drain, do we have to subtract brain linkage?
So
I was wondering.
So from conventional perspective, I'm the case of brain drain.
Right.
From a conventional
because I don't come back to work in Korea. So I don't make any contribution to Korea in terms of human resource.
Then are you suggesting the whole concept of brain drain itself is a concept that cannot be easily measured?
Right. But then if we take a different perspective, especially social capital that Rennie has mentioned earlier, I may not necessarily be a case of brain drain.
Okay.
Because I stay in the United States, but I'm working with Korea very actively, especially I'm trying to bridge between US and Korea in academic and policy communities.
I see.
In other words, I'm trying to become transnational bridge.
Okay.
If that's the case, it's not really a case of brain drain, but brain linkage.
Help me further understanding the concept here. India's case, then, they have huge population, smart Indians working overseas.
Right.
Can we argue, and do we have evidence that those people staying overseas have contributed considerably to the development of India?
Right, absolutely. So I think India is very good in terms of promoting brain linkage. They have very strong networks among Indian engineers in Silicon Valley. Also very strong networks among Indian engineers in Bangalore or within India. And also they are bridging between these two. It's very crucial for Indian development. So let's say, if somebody leave Korea, maybe going to United States and stay there, and they don't do anything with Korea, then that's a brain drain. But if this person works with Korea or works on Korean issue in some way, it could be brain linkage. I mean, that's why this issue about brain drain is not that simple. The main challenge is how to convert a potential brain drain into brain linkage.
Then let's do what Korean media does quite easily all the time, habitually, that is, talk about government policy. Every time there's a problem, we say, what can the government do, rather than thinking about the things that we can do as an individual citizen. But let's do it. What can the Korean government do in order to improve this overall situation of us relatively not being successful in retaining foreign global talents who are being educated in this country?
It's like visa, I guess.
Yeah, a visa.
It's like in Australia, if you finish your college degree, then you're given like 2 years.
2 to 3 years.
To look for a job. And then once you find a job, then you can apply for
permanent residency.
Yeah, permanent residency.
United States, where you are currently residing, their visa policy is not improving in that direction, or is it for the top-notch global talents who could actually work and live in Silicon Valley?
I mean, if you're top-notch talent, there shouldn't be any problem in getting visa, working and living in the United States. And I went to United States on F1 visa, which is a student visa. Then I got H1 visa, and then permanent residence. And
what about
so
the
on.
post 9/11 United States, the country? How is it changing?
I mean, they tightened, their policy, but still, U.S. is quite friendly to newcomers. But I think here we have to ask question: whether migration is also the answer for Korea as well, because U.S. and Australia, they are basically settler societies, migration country, whereas
by definition
Korea is not. So some people argue that Korea really has to change immigration policy
to accept more
to attract and
immigrants.
accept more immigrants.
Right. The words that have been shared here, insights today, is I'm sure for our viewers and viewers who have joined from all around the world, great interest to you. So I have to thank big time for our guests for sharing these wonderful views today. Thank you very much. This is one of the best discussions we have had for a long time, and a very important issue indeed regarding present Korea as well as Korea's future. So this has been a very special experience, and I'm sure our viewers have experienced the same. And that is the reason why you have to come back next time when we talk about these issues that matters for Korea as well as the world. And until then, goodbye.